Well, welcome back to the system and our closeout for our first week in October. And so it's nice with all of the going through a week or so of the system being shut down to actually now end this first week in October with something at least kind of interesting to show. So you'll remember that what we were trying to do just before the shutdown was I wanted to show you how Stormwatch worked, and so we could get some information under our belt as far as how a large system deals with Stormwatch. And so one of the things that I learned early on with the Stormwatch, obviously because I'm in touch with Tomas and with Lee and some other folks that have these larger systems, that when the Stormwatch came through, Lee called me up and we talked a little bit about how his system was reacting, and he says, well, it's charging at 20 kilowatts. I'm like, oh, whoa, because I then immediately thought, oh shoot, well he's got 4 batteries. And so then when you go through a Stormwatch where the batteries will charge off of grid power, now normally when the batteries charge off of grid power, at least from what I've gathered in speaking with folks from Australia and England, is that the Powerwalls limit themselves to 1.7 kilowatts of charge a piece instead of the 5 that they're actually capable of pulling in. And so when Tomas told me that his system was drawing 20 kilowatts, I'm like, oh shoot, when I turn our system on, am I going to blow the breaker? Because each of these is 5 kilowatts. So with his system, that's 20. With this, that'd be 30 kilowatts of draw. And so I thought, okay, well that'll be interesting. And so I was kind of keen to see what would happen. And so what actually goes on, and I'll show you this screenshot that I took earlier, is that the gateway limits the incoming charge to 20 kilowatts, which is reasonable. I'd say that was about perfect if you're trying to charge everything in a hurry. And so that's good to know, that no matter how large your system is, the gateway isn't just going to exceed the home's ability to draw current in. So that's good to know. Now that said, this morning I did actually plug the car in at the same time, and that's what you're seeing here in this screenshot, is that we were drawing for a brief period of time 36.6 kilowatts from the grid. And so that's up there, that's toasty. So if you do have other things plugged in, other home loads going, obviously then that's something to be aware of, that could then really drive up your draw from the grid. So where does that leave us? So this week, what I was thinking, okay, well, what would be the best test that I could possibly do for you guys? And I think that what I'd like to do is, I'd like to have us all imagine that this system actually worked the way it was supposed to. In other words, that on our command, that the system would then charge itself up so that we could then use that charge over a set period of time and then see how long that's going to last. Now, the Stormwatch that we've just been given, it actually, PG&E was saying that the power might be cut off in some places for as long as a week. Now, I don't believe that that's going to affect us here. I don't believe that our power is even going to go off, though it might, because we're not on PG&E here. We're actually in SMUD, or Sacramento Municipal Utilities District. And so, though we're on a different system, it is possible, I suppose, that our grid would have to suffer a sympathetic shutdown, at least for a part of a day or whatever, if the entire PG&E grid has gone down. Don't know. We'll have to kind of see how that goes. But our home right now, we're not running at a deficit as we would in November. It would be really kind of cool if this happens again in November. We can maybe take a closer look at it. But currently, we're running 10 to 15 kilowatt hours of surplus per day, sometimes 20. The home energy use has come way down. We're no longer running the AC. It's actually off right now, and so we'll see what happens here. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go ahead and charge the system up to a reasonable level. I should probably charge it to 100%. I guess I'll charge it to 100%, and then we'll kind of take it from there, because it'll be interesting to see how long it takes it to charge. But we're going to go ahead and charge it up charge up the system, and then I'm going to disconnect our home, and we're going to see how long we can run on zombie apocalypse mode. And I think that that is an appropriate way to test what we're going to be granted with Stormwatch. And so with that, let's go ahead and head over to the studio. I know this is a little early, it's actually in the morning, and so this evening we will reconvene in the studio, go through the numbers for today, and recap our first week in October. Okay, welcome back to the studio. Let's start this video off by what happened at the end of the week, and then obviously we'll start next week's update with the results of the Stormwatch and see what this all did for us. But let's start on the 8th. So on the 8th, which is our traditional closeout day for the week, the system got a notification that something called Stormwatch was engaged. Now, Stormwatch mode is similar to what they do in the software limited cars. You've probably heard about this on the news, where a while back Tesla realized that it was cheaper for them to just make the same battery for all the cars, and then to software limit that battery. If you only paid for a 70 kilowatt hour battery, say, then they would then software limit the battery, and in times of where they would notice that the car was where some disaster was happening, whether that was a tornado or a hurricane coming in, what have you, then they would go ahead and alter the software in the car to allow you to then have the full power of the full capacity of the battery, and so then that would allow you to get out of Dodge and get to safety. And so, very noble thing for them to do. And from a marketing standpoint, it's also kind of brilliant. Same thing, like if you buy a Tesla and you don't pay for the autopilot feature, they do something similar with the XM radio, where for a short period of time they'll give you access to it, right? And so then all of a sudden people go, oh wow, this is pretty cool. I now have, you know, this extra ability, or this extra 30-40 miles that you can drive with the car. And so you then may wind up paying the extra coin to go ahead and have that feature turned on in the car. Now, that said, the batteries, that's not the same as what's going on with the car. I paid for those batteries. I paid for all of the features in those batteries. And one of the things that Tesla did advertise was the ability to shift in the case where you have a time of use plan, where certain times of the day power will cost you more than other times of the day. And so then the idea is then in winter that you would then be able to charge your batteries by powering them up on cheap power, and then supplement that with solar, and then go several days without having to take from the grid at all. I thought, well, that's fantastic. Unfortunately, that's not how they perform, and we've done already a couple of videos. I don't want to beat this to death. You can go ahead and have a look at some of the previous videos we did on this subject. Hopefully that will eventually change, and that Tesla will again allow us to be in charge of Stormwatch, and so then if we have an impending thing coming in like a hurricane or whatever, we don't necessarily have to rely on Tesla. We can charge our own batteries. And so in Europe and in Australia, they limit the power that each individual Powerwall can bring in to 1.7 kilowatts, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is here. So, like I said, on the 8th, we wound up getting a notification that Stormwatch was enabled. And what that does now is that then that says, oh, well, we can now draw power from the grid to bring the system up to full charge to then get us past this problem, whatever is occurring. In our case, it was that PG&E, one of the local suppliers for, one of the state suppliers for electricity, was going to go ahead and shut off some of their local regions around this area. Now, we're on a different supplier. Our supplier, as you know from watching these videos, is SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utilities District. And so we weren't going to be affected per se, but I was wondering, you know, if you shut down so much of the surrounding area from PG&E, will there be a sympathetic shutdown, what have you? And so that would be interesting. We'll go ahead and see how the system performs. We'll go ahead and draw some power off of it. I know all of you guys were really interested in seeing how this all worked. And so then that's what we did. We wound up going ahead and engaging the Stormwatch. So let's go ahead and focus on what it actually allowed us to do. Now, we have a very large system, and the concern that I had was that after speaking with Tomas, where he said he had a 4-battery system and he was charging at 20 kilowatts off of the grid, I'm like, oh no, hopefully they didn't just allow, you know, if you've got, you know, we have 6 batteries, right? So is that going to mean that we're going to draw 30 kilowatts off of the grid? What happens if somebody has 9 batteries? I mean, then, you know, how's that going to work? Are they all those 9 batteries going to try and pull power off the grid? But pleasantly pleased to find out that the Tesla software actually limited the charge rate to 20 kilowatts. So our 6 batteries were charging at a flow rate of 20 kilowatts. We'll pull that up here. That's what the system looked like. We were getting 1.6 kilowatts from solar there, and then you can see that that was in supplementing what was going on. The home was using 0.9. The batteries are charging at 20 kilowatt hours, and then we've got that 19.3 coming from the grid to charge it. So that's great. That was working really good. Now, also in the opening for this video, you also show that we did do a peak draw test. And so that is shown here, both in graphical form and in that power flow chart. And basically what you can see here is we're charging everything simultaneously. That was basically what it would look like if you were actually to do disaster prep, charging the home and the car as quickly as possible. And that's what I was talking about earlier when I said, ooh, you know, it might be to their benefit to change that later on to make sure that it gets limited so that you're not, so that everybody on your block isn't pulling 30 kilowatts all at the same time. That's probably not going to work out so well. But right now, there aren't enough people with home batteries for this to be any kind of an issue, but it's something to keep in mind so that as more and more and more of these battery systems come online, that it will be necessary to then reduce the amount further that each system will draw, or possibly even to have batteries in any one area work cooperatively, and so that, you know, a third of them will charge, and a third of them will charge, and a third of them will charge. That kind of a thing. And again, because of the way that the gateway interacts with Tesla's own systems, they would actually have that capability to be able to do that. And so we'll see how that shakes out in this coming week. We'll go ahead and monitor that a little bit. We again, not unlike what I said in the opening to this video, one other thing is that we decided not to charge the system all the way. What I did was I charged it to 75% and then allowed the battery to charge to 100% off of the remaining freeboard, because at this point in the year, we're still operating at about a 10 to 15 kilowatt hour per day surplus, 20 kilowatts some days, maybe a little more. All depends on what the home use is for that particular day. And so I do actually hope that we wind up getting an opportunity to see Stormwatch engage later on in the year, in November and December, when we can actually see how this all should really work, if we actually are in control of when that system will charge off of the grid, and that would be very handy. So I'm hopeful that we get the chance to see that later on. But let's go ahead and get to our week in review. And with that, let's go ahead and have a look at our first week in September, starting, of course, or October rather, starting, of course, with October 1st. And so, as you can see here, we start off the month with the system still down. As you saw on the graphs of our closeout for September, the system is basically operating as a system would if it didn't have batteries. And so then the solar is still producing, but we're relying on the grid to bank our excess power. And then in this case, as you can see here, it's 37 kilowatt hours for a total daily surplus of 21.4 kilowatt hours, and that again is according to the grid. And so then if you look at the 21.3 when the daily usage is measured against the raw production, you can still that figure is still wholly accurate there. And so we had good production for the day, sunny and cool, and that gives a generally good production there, 43.7 kilowatt hours. But you can see that that's a rapid fall off occurring now. We were last month we were at 50 kilowatt hours a day, and so we're starting to lose efficiency, especially on those north facing panels. And so in the notes we put in 7 kilowatt hours of trickle charge to the car, and again that's done just to kind of keep the general draw on the grid low, and that's in following with our demonstration there. We're trying to show that it's possible to do this without placing a huge demand on the grid, even without the batteries being operational. Just look at that for a second. And then on the 2nd, again, system's still down, running a trickle charge today. The mileage deficit to the car needed to be replaced, and so then we're just trying to keep the car ready for use. Decent production again. We managed to put 16 kilowatt hours to the car and another 16 to the home, and that still left us with a little bit of grid surplus, just like it did the day before. Just see that for a second. And the notes. And here you see something that happens every once in a while. It happened again, so I thought I'd just kind of make a quick note of it. So every once in a while, you wind up having this temperature difference between when you charged the car at night and then unplugged it. And so then in the morning, as everything kind of warms up, you wind up seeing a kind of a phantom increase because of the increase in temperature in the battery. And so it's just a little fun thing I thought I'd mention. Again, it shows up every once in a while, where the available miles of the car the previous evening are more than in the morning. So that's just why that is. And then the 3rd, and finally we get kind of back on track. The system came back online around 11 a.m. and we managed to get nearly a whole day of production out of the system, as you can see there, taking 42.3 kilowatts, and ended our total solar day at 38%. Take a look at that for a second. And so then we have the notes. And again, just that, system back online. And then, as we briefly discussed, the problem was that we had that secondary cutoff that SMUD made us install, and we had a broken wire, broken solder connection on that switch. And so this wasn't a Tesla problem, but it did look like that on their end. It looked like a communications fault, but the fault, as you can see, was local to our system, and should have called SunWorks right away, but was what it was. And so when we shut the grid power off, the gateway tried to reinitialize its batteries, but it couldn't talk to them. So then the system was down. And so on the 4th, again getting back on track, started the day with 19% just before first contribution. I needed to put some charge to the car, so just before first contribution I started a charge, and this had some direct solar contribution and then some coming from the battery, but the lion's share of that 38 kilowatt hours to the car was from the charge in late evening. And so now, alongside this for October 4th, I'm going to put up this graph here, and that again, that shows that brief period of charge in the morning, and then you can see that the charge then starts around 10 in the evening and continues. And as you can see from the graph, it was a bit of a comedy. And what you're seeing here is that you should never return home at 10 at night and then think you're just going to put the car on the charger for a few minutes before you go to bed. My thought was that I was only going to put 10 kilowatts or so to the car, and so then I wound up laying down on the couch with the cat, and both of us promptly fell asleep. So we'll show the result of that for the following day, but the notes basically just that: 10 kilowatts of charge in the morning and then a whopping 28 kilowatt hours by midnight. But as you can see, that wasn't all, and so I'll give you just a minute with that before we go to the 5th. And so then on the 5th, we finish off the hilarity, and I'll put the graph for the 5th up here as well. And this is the result of falling asleep with the cat. As you can see here by the graph, I didn't wind up waking up until 1 in the morning, and until at which time we'd already drawn 16 kilowatts from grid power. And so as you can see in the at the header there, I assigned 50 miles of charge to the car as coming from a source other than sunlight, just to keep us honest. But good production for the day, though, 40.8 kilowatt hours, and as you can see, we're sliding downward again due to that sun angle and then the length of the day shortening. And the notes, just that, what happens when you get old and fall asleep on the couch with the cat. So I'll let you take that in for a minute. And then on the 6th, another decent day of production, another sunny day, cool. Gives us another good benchmark to see what's happening with the days. We got that 39.4 kilowatt hours of production and still running a 15 kilowatt hour or so surplus, but that's because the home usage without the AC or any heat yet has brought us down below that 20 kilowatt hour mark for the daily usage. And at this point we're got a daily use of that 17.3 kilowatt hours and 12 kilowatt hours to the car, giving a total kilowatt hour usage of around 30 kilowatt hours, and then we produced around 40, so just over that 20 kilowatt hours of surplus for the entire day. And then here we have the notes, keeping the car charged for daily use, and the reserve in the system at 39% by total solar day. We have enough should we need to transfer some additional to the car for any out-of-town driving or what have you. But and then on the 7th, basically the same, slightly reduced output, 32.7 kilowatt hours. Again, got some cloudy weather coming in there. No out-of-town driving though, so I decided to let the system recover a little bit and not charge the car. And we had that situation with the rolling blackouts, and so that was all still kind of uncertain. But with only 14.4 kilowatt hours of home usage, we still managed a decent surplus to close out the day at 38% in reserve. And the notes, so just that, ending the day 46 miles in the car. So I set the car to trickle charge in the evening after midnight. Look at that for a second. And then finally the 8th. So this is the part where we've been waiting for our first ability to test that Stormwatch setting. And so I said in the beginning there in the morning, I set the car to trickle charge from the battery, and so then that consumed about 8 kilowatt hours from the morning charge. But the real excitement obviously came with the realization that Stormwatch was available, and so again, that due to those announced outages from PG&E, and so we're able to avail ourselves of that even though we were in the SMUD area. So wound up charging up the system there. But because I knew that we had 12% of battery in where we were when we had first contribution, and the sun was still producing, so then I basically put the equivalent of what the day's overproduction would be into the car as part of that test, and so then that allowed us to kind of strain the system as we showed earlier in the opening there. And so I'm going to release a separate video on the Stormwatch later today so that we can see how that worked. I'll put up some additional graphs and show what we did, but that was that's about it there. And so then the notes for the 8th, just what I said. I'll let you take a look at that for a moment as it goes over the numbers of what happened for the Stormwatch. And as you can see there, we had a total solar contribution of 37 kilowatt hours for the day. We pulled basically 50 kilowatt hours from grid power and just brought our system percentage to 75%, and then we finished our test draw there and just allowed the system to top off and hit 100% that way, rather than charging all the way to the top, because if we'd have done that, then obviously we would have just wound up sending power to the grid, and that's kind of pointless. So, but that brings us to a close for our first week in October. We're still running at a surplus power day by day, generally, like I said, 10, 15, 20 kilowatt hours of surplus power. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, what kind of fall off that we get over the next several weeks as we approach November. I'm looking forward to seeing at what point we get to that breakover point where, like I said, we're already starting to see that fall off of those north-facing panels. And so it'll be interesting to kind of track that and see where we wind up over the next couple of weeks. So till next time, good luck with your own systems, and thank you for joining us. If you just happen to stumble onto this video somehow, go ahead and look back on some of the previous videos to if you're interested in seeing how we got to this point, and if this is the kind of thing that you enjoy keeping tabs on and following. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.